I sell coffee. That's it, that's the whole job. I've got a little steel cart on the corner where the tourists come off the wide road and first catch sight of the palace gates. Been there 11 years. Rain, sun, doesn't matter. I know that pavement better than I know my own kitchen. And I'm telling you this so you understand something. When you stand in one spot for 11 years, you start to feel a day before it goes wrong. You can't explain it. It's like the air changes its mind. That morning, the air changed its mind. It was July. Proper July, the kind we don't usually get here. The sky was that flat, hard blue, no clouds, and by 9 the heat was already sitting on the back of your neck like a hand. The tarmac had that shimmer to it. You could smell it, hot stone, sunscreen, somebody's cigarette, and the sweet burnt smell coming off my own machine. The crowd was thick. School holidays had started, so there were kids everywhere, little ones on shoulders, a group of teenagers filming themselves. 2 nuns, if you can believe it, taking photos on an actual disposable camera. A man in a Hawaiian shirt asking me if the coffee was real espresso or that instant nonsense. Real, I told him. Always real. And across from all of it, behind the black railings, stood the guard. Now I want to describe him properly because most people never really look at these men. They look at the hat, the red tunic, the stillness. They treat him like a statue that happens to breathe. Snap a photo, pull a silly face next to him, walk off. But I see them every day, and I'd started to recognize the faces under those bearskins, even if the tourists couldn't. This one, I didn't know his name yet, I'd learn it later, was young. Maybe 23, 24, tall but not showy about it. He had this very still way of holding his rifle and a jaw that looked like it had been set with a spirit level. I'd seen him on post a handful of times over the past couple of weeks. I'd nicknamed him, privately, the Quiet One, because even among guards, who are all quiet, he had a stillness that went deeper, like the noise of the world reached him and just stopped at the surface. I made him a coffee once, weeks before, off-duty out of uniform in a plain gray hoodie waiting at my cart. I didn't even recognize him at first. He ordered a flat white, said thank you twice, and left a proper tip. Only when he turned and I saw the way he walked, that dead straight, heel-to-toe walk they can't seem to switch off, did I realize who he was. So on that hot July morning, I looked over and I thought, oh, it's you again. The Quiet One, standing his post. I remember the exact moment things started to feel off, because it was so small. There was a group of Americans. You can spot them a mile off, and I mean that with love. Half my regulars are American tourists, and they tip like they're trying to fix the whole country by hand. This group was 5, maybe 6 lads, early 20s, fit. The way they carried themselves told you something before anyone said a word. Straight backs, short hair. That particular kind of loud but alert that you get with certain young men. One of them had a Semper Fi tattoo on his forearm, big and dark. Marines, I figured. On leave, probably. Doing London the way you do it when you're young and far from home, cheap beer, big landmarks, 1,000 photos. They were laughing, messing about. One of them was doing the classic thing, standing next to the guard, trying to make him crack a smile. Harmless. Everyone does it. But one of them wasn't laughing. He was the quietest of the group, shorter than the others, wiry, with a sunburn already going across his nose. And he wasn't looking at the guard. He wasn't looking at the palace. He was looking at the crowd, slow, left to right, the way you scan a room, not a view. I noticed it because it mirrored something. It was the same way the guard scanned, not tourist eyes, working eyes. I didn't think much of it, not then. I turned back to steam some milk for the Hawaiian shirt man, and I said something about the weather, and he said something about how it was hotter back in Phoenix, and I laughed, and life carried on for another 40 seconds. 40 seconds, funny, the numbers you keep. When I looked up again, the sunburned Marine had drifted away from his mates. He'd moved maybe 15 feet toward the railings, and he'd gone very still. And I followed his eyeline. I don't know why, instinct maybe, the same instinct that tells you a day's gone wrong, and I saw what he was looking at. There was a bag. Just a bag. A dark green rucksack, the big kind, sitting up against the base of the railings, tucked slightly behind one of the ornamental stone posts. Nobody near it. Nobody looking at it. In that whole heaving crowd, it sat there in a little pocket of empty space, the way things do when nobody's claimed them. Now here's the thing. In this city, an unattended bag is not exciting. It's Tuesday. There are signs about it in every station, announcements you stop hearing after the first week you live here. 99 times out of 100, it's a tired dad who put his kid on his shoulders and forgot the bag for 2 minutes. It's nothing. It's always nothing. But the Marine wasn't treating it like nothing. He'd gone completely rigid, and his face had changed. The sunburn was still there, but underneath it he'd gone a sort of gray. I watched him look at the bag, then look up at the palace, up at the height of the railings, up at the crowd density around him, and I swear I could see him doing maths in his head. Fast, cold maths. The kind of maths I hope I never have to learn. He turned and said something to his mates. I couldn't hear it, but I saw the laughter drop off their faces like water off a table. One of them shook his head, waved a hand. Relax, man, you could read it from 30 feet. You're on leave, not everything's a threat. The sunburned one didn't relax. He started walking toward the bag. And that's when the day, which had been sitting quietly on the edge, tipped over. I need to stop here and tell you about the guard, because everything that comes next only makes sense if you understand what he was. People think the stillness is for show. It isn't, or it isn't only. That stillness is trained into them over months. The whole point of it, I read about this once, after the whole point is that a foot guard on ceremonial duty is also, genuinely, an operational soldier. The bearskin and the tunic are theater, yes, but the man inside is not. He is not allowed to break post for a bit of nonsense. Not for a rude tourist. Not for a phone in his face. Not for someone yelling. He's trained to endure all of it, to stay, to hold, because the moment a guard starts reacting to every little provocation is the moment anyone can pull him off his post with a joke. So he holds. That's the discipline. That's the entire discipline. You do not move. There is a system for when something is genuinely wrong. There are procedures, signals, a chain, people watching that you never see. A guard doesn't just decide, personally, in the moment to abandon his position and start running around. That's not how any of it works. He trusts the system. He holds his ground and trusts that the rest of the machine is moving. Keep that in your head. Because in a few minutes, a young American who had never been taught any of that was going to look at this man, standing perfectly still 6 feet from what he believed was a bomb, and he was going to think one thing. Why won't he move? The Marine reached the bag. He didn't touch it. I'll give him that. Even in whatever state he was in, he didn't touch it. He crouched. He looked at it from the side, low, the way you'd look under a car. He put his hand out flat, palm down, near it but not on it, like he was feeling for heat, or wires, or God knows what. And then he stood up fast and started telling people to move. I couldn't hear the words at first over the crowd, over my own machine, but I saw the shape of it. Big arm movements. Back. Get back. His voice, when it finally cut through, had that particular tone, not panic exactly, but the flattened-out, forced calm tone of a man trying very hard not to cause a stampede while also needing everyone to move right now. Hey, this bag, whose is this? Whose bag is this? Nobody answered. People just stared at him. A crazy sunburned man shouting near the palace. That's what they saw. A few edged away. Most didn't. A woman actually laughed, nervous, the way you laugh when you don't know what else to do. He turned to the nearest official-looking person he could find. Which was the guard. He crossed the space between them fast, and he came up close to the railings, close to the quiet one, and he pointed back at the bag and he said, I heard this part clearly because his voice had gone up now, he said. There's an unattended bag, right there, nobody's watching it. You need to move these people, you need to move. And the guard did not move. Of course he didn't, he couldn't. Every fiber of his training was screaming hold. He didn't know this man. He didn't know if this was a genuine warning or a diversion, because that's the thing they're trained to think about, that a loud panic in one place is sometimes a curtain for something in another. He couldn't verify the threat himself. He wasn't the eyes and ears of the whole operation. He was one part of it. The right thing, the disciplined thing, was to hold his post and let the system respond. But you have to see it from the Marines' side, too. Picture it, you're a young man who has, I would later learn, done 2 tours in places where an unattended bag is the most terrifying object on Earth. You have watched what those bags do to human bodies. You have friends who are not the same shape anymore because of a bag. That fear isn't in your head, it's in your spine. It's older than thought. And you're standing in a crowd of children and pensioners and nuns with disposable cameras, 6 feet from a bag that has set off every alarm your body owns. And in front of you is a soldier, an actual armed soldier. And you're telling him there's a bomb, and he is looking straight through you like you're made of glass. He won't answer you, he won't acknowledge you, he won't move. To the Marine, in that moment, there was no possible innocent explanation for that. A soldier ignoring a bomb warning could only mean one thing. Either the man was frozen, or the man was part of it. I watched the Marine's face do something terrible. I watched him decide. His mates were closing in now, trying to grab him, pull him back. Ethan, Ethan, leave it, man, come on. So that was his name. Ethan. One of them had him by the shoulder. Ethan shrugged him off without even looking. There is a bag, he said, and his voice cracked right down the middle of it. And for a second, all the training and the muscle fell away, and you could see there was just a frightened kid under there. There is an unattended bag by a crowd of civilians, and this man won't move. Why won't he move? I want to be fair to everyone in this story, so I'll say it plainly. They were both right, and they were both about to be part of something that neither of them wanted. Because at that exact moment, and I've gone over this so many times, two things were true. One, the system was responding. What none of us on that pavement could see was that the bag had already been clocked. Not by the crowd, by the people who watch. There are always people watching that you'll never pick out. Somewhere, quietly, a report was already moving up a chain. The machine had started to turn. The guard knew or trusted that it had. That's why he could stand still. His stillness wasn't blindness. It was faith in a system the Marine couldn't see and had no reason to believe in. Two, the Marine had no way on earth to know that. All he could see was a soldier failing to act. So you had two brave men, both trying to protect the same crowd of strangers, both certain they were doing the right thing, and absolutely no shared language between them. No way to bridge the 6 feet of hot air and iron railing between one kind of courage and the other. I put down the milk jug. I remember that. Just set it down on the cart very carefully, like it mattered. The Hawaiian shirt man had stopped talking. Everyone near me had gone quiet. That specific quiet, where 100 people all sensed the same thing at once without a single one of them saying it. Ethan reached to his waistband. I thought everyone near me thought gun. You could feel the whole crowd flinch as one animal. It wasn't a gun. It was a taser, one of those civilian ones, the yellow and black kind. He'd bought it, I found out much later, at a shop in the States, and stupidly, illegally, but that's a different conversation, brought it over in his checked bag. The way a certain kind of young man carries a thing that makes him feel less afraid in a strange city. He probably hadn't thought about it once the whole trip. It was just there, in his waistband, on the worst possible morning. And in his head, I've tried to imagine this 1,000 times, in his head, the logic must have been something like this. There is a bomb. There is a soldier standing on top of it who will not move. If he won't move himself, I have to move him. I have to physically get this man off this spot before it kills him and everyone behind him. It's insane, and it's also, if you squint, a kind of love. He raised the taser. His mates screamed at him. Somebody in the crowd screamed. The guard, the quiet one, finally broke his forward stare and looked directly at the Marine. And for 1/2 second, these two young men looked straight into each other's eyes across the railings, and I swear neither of them understood the other at all. Then Ethan fired. I have played this next part in my head so many times that I don't fully trust my own memory of it anymore. That's the truth. When something happens that fast, your brain doesn't record it in order. It records it in pieces, and then later it stitches the pieces together into something that feels like a sequence, and you can never quite be sure the stitching is right. But here's what I've got. The taser fired with a sound like a stapler. That's the honest, stupid, human detail I always come back to. Not a bang, not a crack, a cat-chunk, almost nothing, almost polite. The two little probes hit the guard high on the chest, and I watched this trained, disciplined, immovable man, this pillar, I watched him fold. It's a horrible thing to see. The current does something to the body that has nothing to do with will. It doesn't matter how brave you are, how much you've endured, how deep your training runs. When the electricity goes through, the muscles simply stop being yours. The guard's whole frame went rigid and wrong, and his rifle came down, and he dropped, not gracefully. Not the way people fall in films, but suddenly like a marionette with the strings cut, onto the stone behind the railings. The bearskin came off, rolled a little way. I remember that. This great tall symbol of the whole thing, rolling on the ground like a lost football, and underneath it the guard was just a young man on the floor, twitching, gasping, his face open with shock and pain. The crowd came apart. Not all at once. First, there was a beat of pure silence, that horrible held breath. Then somebody screamed properly, and then everybody was screaming, and everybody was moving, and the whole neat picture, the tourists, the photos, the nuns, the hot blue morning, the whole thing shattered into pure chaos. Ethan stood there frozen, the taser still up, and even from where I was I could see the exact moment the horror of what he'd done hit him. Because the guard on the ground was clearly not a terrorist. He was clearly not part of anything. He was clearly just a boy in a costume who'd been electrocuted for standing still. And the bag was still there. The bag was still there. His mates got to him. 3 of them grabbed him at once, and there was shouting, English and something else, and one of them wrenched the taser out of his hand and threw it away across the pavement where it skittered under my cart. And I remember staring at it lying there by my own foot like it was a live snake. And then 2 men in ordinary clothes, I hadn't clocked them at all. They'd been in the crowd the whole time, one in a polo shirt, one with a cap. 2 men came from nowhere and had Ethan on the ground so fast it barely looked real. That's the watching I told you about. They'd been 6 feet away the entire time, and I never saw them. 1 second Ethan was standing there shattered. The next he was face down on the hot stone with a knee in his back and his arm folded up, and a voice, very calm, very hard, saying words I couldn't hear. Sirens, now there were sirens from more than one direction, already that fast. And I understood, standing there with a snake taser by my shoe, that the Marine had been half right about something after all. The system had been watching. It just hadn't been watching the thing he thought it should be. The guard on the ground moved. I want you to hear this properly, because this is the part that stayed with me longer than any of the rest of it. A man had just put 50,000 volts through his chest. He'd been dropped, humiliated, his hat rolling in the dirt in front of hundreds of people on the worst kind of stage. Nobody on earth would have blamed him for staying down, for curling up, for just being a hurt young man on the floor for a minute. He got up, slow, shaking. His hands wouldn't quite work. I could see him fumbling, his fingers not obeying, but he got a knee under himself, and then a foot, and then he stood, swaying, gray-faced, and he reached out one trembling hand and took hold of the railing to steady himself, and he turned to face his post again. He turned back to his post. Even then, even after all that, some part of that man's brain, deeper than pain, deeper than shock, was still saying the only thing it had been trained to say. Hold, get back to your post, stand. I've never seen anything like it. I'm a coffee man. I've seen a lot of ordinary courage in 11 years. People are braver than you'd think in small ways all day long. But I'd never seen anything like a boy standing back up into his own duty with his body still shaking from the current. It didn't look like showing off. It looked like the most natural thing in the world to him. It looked like breathing. He got maybe halfway upright. And that's when the bomb went off. It wasn't at the bag. That's the thing nobody expects when I tell this. It wasn't the green rucksack at all. The rucksack, it turned out later, was exactly what unattended bags almost always are: someone's forgotten hold-all, gym kit, and a wet towel and a paperback, belonging to a jogger who'd gone to find a toilet. Nothing, it was always nothing. Ethan had been terrified of the wrong bag. The real one was 300 yards away, near the edge of Hyde Park, in a bin by a busy path, in a completely different crowd. And it went off at 9:47 in the morning. I felt it before I heard it. That's a strange sentence, and I know it, but it's true. There was a pressure, a thump that came up through the pavement into the soles of my feet, into my chest, a punch of air that made my whole cart shudder and knocked a stack of paper cups onto the ground. And then a heartbeat behind it, the sound. And it wasn't like the films either. It was flatter, heavier. A huge, dull whump that seemed to come from inside your own head as much as from out there. And then a long, strange, ringing hush. Then the birds. All the pigeons in the whole area went up at once. Hundreds of them. A great gray clatter of wings against that hard blue sky. And for a second the sky was just full of panicking birds. And then the screaming started again, but different. Bigger, from further off, from over there, from the park. I'll be honest with you about myself. I did nothing useful in that first moment. I just stood there. My ears were ringing and my legs had gone to water and my whole brain had shrunk to a single stupid loop. Cups. I've dropped the cups. I've dropped the cups, because that's what shock does. It hands you something small and meaningless to hold so you don't have to hold the big thing. But not everyone froze. The guard didn't. The blast, that pressure wave, had staggered him, put him back down onto one knee at the railing. But by the time the birds were still coming up, he was up again, fully up this time. Something had changed in him in that second. Before, he'd been a shaking boy getting back to his post out of pure trained instinct. Now his eyes had cleared. Now the training wasn't a reflex anymore, now it was a purpose. Because now the thing he'd been holding his post for, the real thing, had finally shown itself, and the machine he'd trusted was fully awake. And the crowd around the palace, my crowd, the tourists and the children and the nuns, was about to do the most dangerous thing a frightened crowd can do. It was about to run. All of it in every direction, blind. This is where I have to tell you about the second guard and the officers, and how the whole thing turned, because it stopped being about two young men and became about a couple of hundred terrified strangers who were 3 seconds from trampling each other. A crowd in panic isn't people anymore. It's a tide. And a tide near railings, near steps, near narrow gaps, kills people all on its own without any help from any bomb. More people get hurt in the running than in the thing they're running from. That's the ugly truth of it. The guard saw it. I don't know how, training, instinct, both, but he saw the tide starting and he understood it faster than any of us, and he did something. He didn't run. God, he didn't run. He turned to face the crowd, this swaying, gray-faced boy with the taser marks still on his tunic. And he lifted his arm, and in a voice that should not have had that much force in it after what his body had just been through, he bellowed. "Stay where you are, stay calm, this way, walk, do not run, walk." And here's a strange thing about human beings. In a moment of pure terror, when nobody knows what to do, people will grab onto anyone who sounds like they do. It doesn't matter if it makes sense. A soldier in a red tunic, upright, loud, certain people turned toward that voice like plants turning to light. The tide, which had been about to break every which way, hesitated, wobbled, and began raggedly to follow the sound of the one person there who seemed to know where the ground was. He directed them, arm out straight, steady, this way, walk, this way, away from the park, away from the blast, through the wider gaps where the tide could flow without crushing itself. A father with 2 little kids, the nuns holding hands now, cameras forgot. The Hawaiian shirt man, ashen, moving where the arm pointed. I saw the guard grab a woman who'd fallen, haul her up by the back of her coat with one shaking arm, set her on her feet, point her the right way, all without stopping the flow, all without leaving the spot he'd been beaten to the ground defending. And more of them were coming now. More soldiers, more officers, appearing from doorways and side gates and unmarked cars, moving fast and hard and calm, and radios, and a voice on a loudhailer, and everything speeding up into a great coordinated machine that had clearly, absolutely been ready for exactly this its whole existence, and had simply been waiting, quietly, folded up inside an ordinary morning, for the day it would be needed. They tell me, the people who know about these things, that what happened next had a name. Emergency protocols. A whole sequence, rehearsed 1,000 times, of what the government does when a device goes off in the heart of the city. But from where I stood, it didn't look like protocols. It looked like the whole world suddenly deciding, all at once, to be careful with these frightened people. Roads I'd never seen empty went empty. Barriers came from nowhere. Ambulances, so many ambulances, poured toward the park. Helicopters low overhead, that heavy chop 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 you feel in your ribs. Armed officers, real ones, not ceremonial, moving in that low fast crouch you only ever see on the news, spreading out, checking, clearing, calling the all directions in flat hard voices. And in the middle of it, this one young guard, still on his feet, still pointing, still saying, "Walk, this way, walk," until finally, an officer reached him, put a hand on his shoulder, said something, and I watched the guard shake his head. Whatever the officer offered him, a medic, a rest, a way out of there, he shook his head and stayed until the last of the crowd near him had thinned to nothing, until his stretch of pavement was clear and safe, and his job was actually, genuinely done. And then he let them take him, then and not 1 second before. They half-carried him toward an ambulance. His legs had finally given out. And as they moved him past, not 10 feet from my cart, I saw his face properly for the first time all morning. And it wasn't heroic. That's the thing. It wasn't a hero's face. It was a frightened, exhausted, 23-year-old face. Wet-eyed, jaw still trembling, a boy who had just been electrocuted and then bombed, and then had to hold 200 strangers together with his own bare voice, and was only now, finally, allowed to be scared. He looked at me, I don't know why. Maybe because I was the only thing not moving. Maybe because I was standing there like an idiot with a jug of milk I'd never put down. I did the only thing I had. I held up a paper cup. Stupid, useless coffee, like it was a normal Tuesday. And this boy, this incredible, half-destroyed boy, he looked at the cup, and something moved across his face that was almost a laugh. Just for a second. And then they lifted him into the ambulance, and the doors closed, and he was gone. They had Ethan on the ground the whole time. I'd half forgotten him, God help me. But when I looked, he was still there, face down, cuffed now, 2 officers over him, and he wasn't struggling. He'd stopped struggling a long time ago. He was just lying there on the hot stone with his cheek pressed to it, and he was watching the ambulance leave, watching them take away the man he'd tasered. And I have never in my life seen a face hold that much of something at once. Guilt, relief, terror, and under all of it this awful, drowning confusion, because he'd been right. There had been a bomb. He'd felt it in his spine before anyone, and he'd been wrong, so completely wrong, about the bag and the guard and what to do, and a good man was in an ambulance because of it. Both those things were true, and they were tearing him in half right there on the pavement. One of the officers said something to him. I heard this bit because they were close. That guardsman, the officer said, not cruel, just flat and tired, held his post while you put him on the ground, and then he got up and cleared this crowd, so... A pause. You had the right instinct, son, and the wrong everything else. Ethan closed his eyes. And overhead the helicopters turned, and toward the park the sirens kept climbing, and the great careful machine of the city kept folding these frightened people up into safety. And the morning that had been so blue and so hot went on becoming the worst day any of us on that corner would ever see. But it wasn't over, not the part that matters. Because what happened weeks later, when a broken American Marine and a disciplined British guardsman finally actually spoke to each other, is the whole reason I'm telling you any of this at all. They shut the whole area down for 4 days. You don't realize how much life is packed into a place until it's suddenly empty. That corner, my corner, that's normally thick with people from 7 in the morning, it went silent, taped off. Just wind and paper and the occasional officer walking a slow line. I wasn't allowed near my own cart for the better part of a week. I stood at the edge of the cordon like everyone else, watching men in white suits move in and out of a place I'd sold coffee at for 11 years, and I felt something I didn't have a word for. Like the ground I'd stood on my whole adult life had turned out to have a door in it I never knew about. The bomb near the park, I won't dwell on the worst of it because it isn't mine to dwell on, and because the people who were hurt deserve better than to be turned into someone's story. It was bad. It could have been so much worse. That's the phrase everyone kept using in those days in the papers, on the news, in the queue at the shop. It could have been so much worse. And every time someone said it, I thought about a young man on his feet with a taser burn on his chest, turning a stampede into an orderly walk with nothing but his voice. Because that's the part that didn't make the headlines, not really. The headlines wanted the shocking bit. Marine tasers Palace Guard. That was the clip everyone had. Somebody filmed it. Of course somebody filmed it. And it went everywhere. And for about 2 days the whole conversation was just that 8 seconds out of context, with everyone shouting about it. Look at this idiot American attacking one of our guards. No, look, there was a bomb. He was trying to warn people. He tasered a soldier. There's no excuse. The soldier just stood there. What was he supposed to do? On and on, everyone certain. Everyone with the full story from 8 seconds of phone footage. And I'd stand there behind my little bit of cordon tape, one of maybe 3 people in the entire world who'd actually watched the whole thing from the start, and I'd think, you don't know. None of you know. It wasn't a villain and a victim. It was 2 brave men who couldn't understand each other, and a real monster 300 yards away that neither of them could see. I learned their names properly in the weeks after, the way you do bits in the news, bits from an officer who took my statement and was kinder than he needed to be, bits I'm honestly not sure I'm allowed to know. The guard was called Daniel, Guardsman Daniel Osai, 23, from up north originally, first in his family to do this. His mum, apparently, had a photo of him in the bearskin as the screensaver on her phone and showed it to absolutely everyone, the way mums do. The Marine was Ethan, Corporal Ethan Briggs, also 23, funnily enough, from a small town I'd never heard of in a state I couldn't have found on a map, Tour. And this is the part that broke me a little when I found out. He'd lost 2 friends to exactly the kind of device he thought that green bag was. 2. Both to unattended bags in places far from home. So when he saw that rucksack sitting against the palace railings in a crowd of children, he wasn't seeing a rucksack at all. He was seeing the two coffins that had followed him home. His whole nervous system had been rewired by grief into a machine that could only read one thing. And it read it, and it acted, and it was wrong, and it was also, in the very deepest part of it, trying so hard to be right. They didn't send Ethan to prison. I was glad of that, and I know not everyone would be. There were charges, the taser was illegal, and you can't go tasering soldiers on the street no matter your reasons, and there has to be a line or there's no line at all. But when the whole story came out, when they understood the tour and the friends and the genuine belief that he was saving lives, they found a way through it that wasn't a cage. He was sent home, quietly. Not a hero, not a criminal. Just a haunted young man on a plane back to a small town, carrying one more thing he'd have to learn to live with. I thought that was the end of it. Two men damaged, sent off in opposite directions across an ocean, never to cross paths again. That's how these things usually go. The story just stops. Nobody gets an ending. You only get endings in films. But I got to see this one, and I still can't quite believe I did. It was maybe 2 months later. The cordon was long gone. My corner was busy again, busier even because for a while there people came just to see it, to stand where it happened, which I found ghoulish and also completely understood. Life had done what life does, closed over the top. The blue July morning felt like something from a different year. And on an ordinary gray Tuesday, a man in a plain gray hoodie came and stood at my cart. I knew him before he ordered, the walk. That dead straight, heel-to-toe walk they can't switch off. It was Daniel, off duty, out of uniform, just a young man in a hoodie, exactly like the first time I'd ever served him, back before any of this, back when he was just the quiet one to me. He ordered a flat white. Said thank you twice, and I couldn't help it. I said, "You're all right then, you're back." He looked at me properly, realized maybe that I'd been there, that I'd seen it, and he gave a small nod. "Getting there," he said, "that's all, getting there. Guardsmen, I've learned, are not big talkers about themselves." And then, while I was making his coffee, another man came and stood a little way off. Nervous, hanging back, and I looked up and my hands actually stopped on the machine. It was Ethan. He'd flown back, from that small town across that whole ocean. He'd flown back to London for one reason, and I was about to watch it happen, and I nearly dropped the jug all over again. They'd arranged it. I found out later it had taken months, letters, then video calls, then a lot of people in offices deciding whether it was a good idea. Daniel had asked for it, apparently, not the other way round. Daniel had asked to meet the man who tasered him. Ethan came forward slowly, like the ground might not hold him. He'd lost the sunburn. He looked older than 2 months should make a man look. He stopped a few feet from Daniel, and he opened his mouth, and nothing came out. And Daniel, the quiet one, the disciplined one, the man who'd been electrocuted and bombed and had held his post through all of it. Daniel put down his coffee on my cart, and he stepped forward, and he put out his hand. Ethan stared at it. "I've been trying to write you a letter for 8 weeks, Ethan said, and his voice was wrecked. "I've started it about 40 times. I can't, there's no, how do you even say?" "You saw a threat to civilians," Daniel said, quiet even. "And you acted. That's the job, you just—" And here, and I will never forget this, here the smallest, driest smile touched the corner of his mouth. "You had the wrong soldier and the wrong bag." Ethan made a sound that was half a laugh and half something much worse. And he took the hand, and the two of them shook right there at my cart, on an ordinary gray Tuesday, on the exact stretch of pavement where one had put the other on the ground. I gave up all pretense of making coffee. I just watched. "Why won't you move?" Ethan said. He wasn't asking. He was quoting himself, his own voice from that morning, the thing that had been eating him alive for 2 months. I kept thinking, this soldier won't move. There's a bomb and he won't move, and I couldn't understand it. I thought. He stopped. "I thought you didn't care or that you were part of it. I actually thought God." "I know," Daniel said. "But you did care. You cared more than any of us. You stood there caring so hard you wouldn't even move to save yourself." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing that I've thought about nearly every day since. He said it simply, the way you say something you've had a long time to understand. "Where you're from," he said, "brave means move, see the danger, go to it, act. That's how you were trained, and it's kept people alive, and it's a good way to be brave." He picked his coffee back up. Where I stand, brave means hold. See the danger and don't run and don't flinch and trust that the ones you can't see are moving so that you don't have to. Trust the whole, even when your part of it looks like doing nothing. He took a sip. Two kinds of brave. That morning they crashed straight into each other. Wasn't your fault, wasn't mine. Nobody ever teaches you the other man's kind. Ethan looked at the ground. I put you on the floor. You did, Daniel nodded, and I got up. A pause. And then a real bad man 300 yards away tried to hurt a lot of people. And between us, you feeling it in your gut, me holding my ground and then clearing that crowd between us, maybe some folk got home who wouldn't have. He shrugged, this small British shrug, like they were discussing the weather. I'd rather have been tasered by a good man for the right reasons than ignored by a coward for the wrong ones. So. And that was it, that was the whole speech. He didn't make it big, he didn't make it a moment. He just picked up his coffee and drank it and stood there with the man who'd electrocuted him, two 23-year-olds from opposite ends of the earth, and after a while they started talking about smaller things. Football, I think. The flight. Whether the coffee in America was really as bad as everyone said. Daniel's verdict, delivered with a straight face, yes. I never charged either of them, by the way. Some things you don't put on a card reader. I still sell coffee. That's still the whole job. Same corner, same cart, same railings across the way with a different young man standing his post most days, still and silent, while the tourists snap their photos and pull their silly faces and never once wonder what's going on behind those eyes. And I want to tell them. Every single day I want to lean over my cart and say, do you know what that man might be? Do you know what he might do if the air ever changes its mind again? Do you have any idea what's standing in front of you pretending to be a statue? I don't, of course. You can't, it'd be mad, so I just make the coffee. Sometimes, on a hot blue morning, when the heat sits on the back of my neck like a hand and the pigeons are quiet, I'll catch one of them scanning the crowd, slow, left to right, working eyes, not tourist eyes, and I'll think about Daniel. And I'll think about Ethan, back home in his small town, carrying his two lost friends and now, I hope, one more thing beside them. The memory of a man he put on the ground who got up and shook his hand and forgave him in the plainest words you ever heard. Two kinds of brave. Most days the world only ever needs one of them and never notices it's there. But I've seen what happens on the day it needs both. And I'll tell you the truth, I never look at a still, silent man in a red coat the same way again. Because I know now that the stillness isn't empty. It's the loudest thing on that whole street. You just have to have stood there once on the worst morning of your life to finally be able to hear it.